Hello, everybody. Milton Davis here, MV Media. Hope you guys are having a wonderful day. Tonight is reading time, so going to give everybody a few minutes to show up and just kind of give you a little background on going, do a little housekeeping, I guess to say, before we get started reading. This month is Steampunk Month for MV Media, and we have all of our steampunk titles on sale. We have inventory as well as ebooks. What we have in inventory is From Here to Timbuktu, which is my first steampunk novel. La Rosa de Matanzas, which is which is the sequel to From Here to Timbuktu. And my first steampunk publication, which I co-edited with Balagoon Ojitade, the Steampunk Anthology. So tonight I'm going to be reading a story called Slipping in the Darkness. And yes, the title of the story was inspired by War's song Slipping in the Darkness. Just to give you a little bit more background on that. In 2018, I was invited to Whimsycon in Denver. And not only was I invited, I was actually came as the guest of honor for the con, which was their first con. And they decided they were going to have an anthology. The name of the anthology was Wit and Whimsy. And they asked me to provide a story for the anthology. And that story was Slipping in the Darkness. It's last week, if you remember, I read a story called The Swarm, which was basically a story about Farmer Aketa, one of the characters from Here to Timbuktu. Tonight, this story, Slipping in the Darkness, is actually about Zeke Culpepper. Before Zeke became a bounty hunter, Zeke actually served some time in the Haitian Army, in the new Haitian Army. And he fought in a few conflicts there. And that's where he gained some of his skills and some of his reputation as a fighter. The story that I'm about to read you actually takes place while Zeke was in the Haitian Army. So I'm gonna say hello to Barry. Hey Barry, how you doing? Barry's a faithful listener, always here. And so we're gonna get right into this story. Again, the title of the story is Slipping in the Darkness. Zeke took the full shot glass into his trembling hand as the patrons of Luna Oscura chanted, "Drink, drink, drink, drink." The saloon went blurry, so he blinked his eyes to clear his vision. Joshua stared at him, a jovial smile between his round, dimpled cheeks on his ebony face. "Come on, mon frere. One more shot and the eagles are ours." "Easy for you to say," Zeke slurred. Zeke steadied his hand and slowly raised the shot glass to his mouth. He drank slowly, the brown liquid burning a path between his puckered lips and teeth down into his churning stomach. He closed his eyes, then slammed the glass on the table. He swayed and everyone gasped. Zeke steadied, then opened his eyes and he grinned. "How's that for a Fredonian?" His comrades and the saloon patrons answered his words with curses and applause. Joshua took off his beret and collected their winnings. He dropped the hat on the table before Zeke. "Not bad, mon frere, not bad." "I told you I could do it," Zeke said. "There's enough here to put us in hostile for the next week." "Too bad we muster out in 3 days," Zeke replied. "We'll blow it when we get to New Orleans," Joshua said. "Joshua!" His friend turned toward the voice calling him. When he turned back, his face was serious. "Zeke, I have business to tend to," he said. "I'll be back momentarily." "I'm coming with you," Zeke said. "We're supposed to be celebrating, remember?" I'll be just a minute." "Bullshit." Zeke stood as a man and woman approached the table. Both were well dressed for the frontier, their faces as serious as Joshua's. By their clothing, he could tell they were Spaniards, which made Zeke a little suspicious. "Aren't you going to introduce me?" Zeke said. "Another time," Joshua replied. "I'll be right back." Zeke stepped toward his friend and his head spun. His stomach roared like a flooding river and his eyes became heavy. "Oh shit," he said. As his eyes faded, he saw Joshua, the man, and the woman walk through the saloon doors and into the darkness. The squeaking of the awakening soldiers' bunks was constant and persistent like a ticking clock. The annoying sound dug into Zeke's ears like a broken bugle. Zeke sat up to cover his ears. His head spun like a twister. He lay back down and belched the nasty taste of sour whiskey into his mouth. "My Lord," he moaned. He sat up slower the second time, the spinning still present but manageable. He stood, then staggered out of the room, ignoring the jibes and complaints of his comrades. By the time he reached the latrine, the foul concoction in his stomach had worked its way into his throat. He barely made it to the toilet. After a gut-wrenching vomit, he felt better. Zeke ambled back to the room to get his shaving kit. As he approached his bunk, he noticed Joshua's empty bed. It hadn't been slept in. Zeke's stomach fluttered, but this time it had nothing to do with last night's drinking. Pierre, a stocky Haitian with drowsy eyes, nodded as he shuffled by. Zeke grabbed his shoulder. "Hey, did you see Joshua leave this morning?" Pierre yawned as he glanced back at Joshua's bunk. "No," he grunted. "Did you see him come in?" Joshua looked at Zeke with an annoyed expression. "Do I look like his mama?" He snatched his shoulder away, then continued to the latrine. Zeke stared at his friend's bed. Maybe he spent the night with his friends. Zeke remembered the faces of the man and woman who Joshua left with. Although they looked as though they knew his friend, they did not look friendly. Zeke shrugged. He would investigate it later. For now, he needed to get in uniform and get his things in order. In 3 days, they mustered out, leaving the arid climate of Espana Nueva, Arizona territory, and returning to the vibrant dampness of New Orleans. He shaved and dressed. At 800 hours, the commander, the immaculate Capitaine Lubin St. Fleur, strode into the room as the men stood at attention before their bunks. Zeke marveled at how the man was always perfectly dressed. Even his thick waxed mustache seemed starched and pressed like his uniform. The Capitaine strolled down the ranks, inspecting each soldier with his keen eye. Despite the end of the campaign, the meticulous commander still demanded rigid discipline and dress, which was another thing Zeke wouldn't miss when he mustered out. The Capitaine was particularly fond of harassing Zeke. St. Fleur halted before Zeke, giving him his special attention. He scrutinized him from head to toe, kneeling to inspect his boots and rising slowly as he stared. Their faces finally met, and the Capitaine frowned. "You smell terrible, Fredonian," he said. Zeke smiled. "It was a good night, monsieur." The Capitaine's frown deepened. "Despite that, your uniform is passable. We'll make a Haitian out of you yet." "I hope not, monsieur," Zeke snapped. "My mama might not recognize me." The Capitaine smirked. "I would have kicked you out of this army long ago if you weren't such a good shot." He glanced at Joshua's bunk. "Where's your comrade?" Zeke's expression became serious as his stomach tightened. "I don't know, monsieur." St. Fleur's eyes narrowed. "We'll discuss this later in my office," he said. "Yes, monsieur," Zeke replied. He was about to suffer another reprimand. St. Fleur paired all the soldiers in his unit. Each was responsible for the other. Both were rewarded and punished equally. Just another reason for Zeke to be upset with Joshua. "Comrades," the Capitaine said, "we muster out in 2 days. New Haiti thanks you for your valiant service. Most of you will remain as part of our glorious army, although many of you will move on to new lives or return to old ones. For those who are leaving, I express my deepest sympathy." The soldiers laughed. The Capitaine did not. "Take this time to make sure your equipment is secure and handle any business you have with the local population. The airships will arrive at El Mirage at 1200 hours Thursday morning. You will be in formation on the landing field by 11:30. Do you understand?" "Yes, monsieur," the soldiers responded. "Bon. Continue your duties. Culpepper, come with me." The Capitaine strode from the room. Zeke shrugged his shoulders, then followed. The Capitaine's office was as perfect as his uniform, the walls festooned with awards and accolades. He sat behind his desk and motioned for Zeke to sit in the chair on the opposite side. I'm giving you a day to find Joshua, he said. Can you do that without getting into trouble? I can, monsieur. Bon. I'm assuming that he must have some local obligations he's handling. Local obligation was the commander's phrase for a girlfriend or family. The Grand Army had served in Arizona for 3 years, so it was only natural that some of the men developed relationships with the local women. The problem was a few had families in New Haiti. Joshua was one of those few. I don't think it has anything to do with that, Zeke replied. Last time I saw him, he was leaving the saloon with a fancy-dressed man and woman. St. Fleur held up his hand. Please, I don't need to know the details. Just bring him back. Yes, monsieur. Zeke stood to leave. Culpepper, this errand does not relieve you of your other duties. I expect you to complete them as well before Thursday. Of course, monsieur. The commander began studying his papers on his desk. You're dismissed. Zeke saluted, then left the office. Asshole, he whispered. Zeke hurried to the stables, secured a horse, then rode to Luna Oscura. Few citizens walked the dusty streets. Most were tending their farms in the nearby fertile valley or working the railroad. He hitched his horse, then strolled through the swinging doors. The saloon was deserted with the exception of the escort bartender. It was an American model, big, bulky, and spewing steam from his head pipe like a mini locomotive. Hola, it said in a shrill voice. ¿Cómo puedo servirte? Zeke frowned. His French was passable, but his Spanish was terrible. No hablo español, he said. A red light blinked near the escort's head pipe, and it rolled into the back. Moments later, the bleary-eyed bartender from the night before came to the bar. How can I help you? The bartender asked. Do you remember me from last night? Zeke said. Yes, I do, the bartender replied. You're the man who drank himself sick. How'd you know I got sick? Zeke asked. I've been a bartender for a long time, he replied. I know when a patron is about to puke. It's how I keep my floors clean. Do you remember the man I came in with? Joshua? Of course. One of my best customers. Spends too much time in here if you ask me. Zeke couldn't argue with him on that. He stuck out his hand and they shook. What's your name? Zeke asked. Rodrigo Ortiz, the man replied. Nice to meet you, Rodrigo. I'm Zeke Culpepper. Look, Rodrigo, I got a dilemma. You see, my friend didn't come back to the barracks last night. Last I saw, he left with a fancy-dressed man and woman. I tried to go with him, but he told me not to worry. I wish I hadn't listened to him, but it's too late now. My commander sent me to find him, and I was hoping you could help me. Rodrigo's face paled. Listen to me, mister. If your friend left with those two, he's in serious trouble. Who are they? And where would they take him? Rodrigo swallowed. I can't say. All I can tell you is that you should go back to your barracks and tell your commander that your friend is dead. Zeke felt a chill in his gut. Rodrigo's last words knocking whatever dregs of inebriation was out of him. What do you mean, dead? Rodrigo looked away as he pretended to clean glasses. That's all I can say, Zeke. The sherry anymore will put my life in jeopardy, and I'm not about to die for a Haitian soldier. I have a family, too. I'm not leaving until you tell me who those damn people were. Then you're as dead as your friend, Rodrigo replied. Look, I know you don't know me very well, but I'm not a man you want to get angry. Rodrigo reached under the bar and pulled out a double-barrel shotgun. I told you. Zeke snatched the gun from Rodrigo's hand before he could finish his sentence. The escort rolled into the barroom. Zeke spun and fired one barrel into the automaton's headpiece, sending it rolling back into the back room. He turned to Rodrigo. This wasn't what I planned, but you made the first move, Zeke said. Is there anybody in this town willing to tell me anything? Go to the mining camp, Rodrigo said. You may find someone stupid enough to talk to you there, but you'll have to pay for it. Zeke tipped his hat. Much obliged to you. Sorry things turned out this way. No hard feelings. Rodrigo answered Zeke with a scowl. Zeke didn't take any chances. He backed out the door, then unloaded the shotgun, placing the extra shell in his pocket, then throwing the gun as far as he could. He unhitched his horse, then galloped out of town, back to the base. Zeke jumped off his horse before the barracks and ran to the commander's office. The commander looked up from his papers, startled. Culpepper, what is the meaning of this intrusion? He snapped. Sorry, monsieur, but it looks like we got a situation on our hand. Explain, St. Fleur said. Looks like them folks Joshua left with are some bad people, Zeke replied. The bartender said if Joshua left with them, he's probably dead. St. Fleur placed down his pen, then steepled his fingers. This is a grave development, he said. He looked at Zeke, his eyes serious. How much time do you need? 2 days as least, Zeke replied. Honestly, I don't know how long it might take. The bartender wasn't exactly giving away information, and I suspect nobody else will either. I won't leave one of my men in this place, the commander said. Take all the time you need. Bring Joshua back, Culpepper. Bring him back alive or dead. I'm counting on alive, Zeke said. If it's okay with you, I think I need to do without this uniform. I might have to do some things that wouldn't reflect too kindly on the image of the Grand Army. Of course, the commander said. Do what you need to do and take whatever you need. Merci, monsieur, Zeke said. Godspeed, the commander said. You might want to keep God out of this, Zeke replied. Things might get ugly. The miner's camp was a day's ride from town. It lay on the end of a dirt road that wound through the rocky peaks and ended in a formerly wooded valley sliced by the Pecos River. The valley had once been a haven for the local wildlife, but once gold was found in the river 10 years ago, the land was swamped by folks hoping to find an instant fortune in the once pristine waters. The trees were cut to provide shanties, and the animals hunted almost to oblivion to provide food for the hungry settlers. Once the gold was depleted from the now muddy river, the miners began boring into the hills seeking rich gold veins within the rock. Those in search of easy wealth dwindled, while those with fewer prospects remained to work the mines. They labored not for the fortune they once sought, but for the stability of steady work and a meager paycheck. Zeke gazed down on the mining town from atop a bare hill. The town sprawled along the riverbank, smoke rising from the small homes and businesses. Somewhere down there was a person that could tell them where to find Joshua. With no idea where to start, he would go to the best place to begin, a saloon. Let's go, he said as he reined his horse. The mare tipped down the hill, followed by the mule carrying his provisions. 15 minutes later, he traveled down the main street. The town was mostly empty, the residents most likely doing their time in the mines. The saloon was easy to find, its entrance crowned with a wooden sign, the words Paradise barely visible through the grime. The hints of better days could be seen in the fancy columns and windows. The swing door was made of rich mahogany wood. Zeke hitched the mare and the mule, then walked inside. The saloon was deserted. There was no one tending the bar. Anybody home? He called out from the doorway. He heard a door open upstairs and the sound of hard shoes hitting wooden planks. A woman appeared at the top of the stairs wearing a simple white blouse and a blue cotton skirt that fell to her ankles. Her auburn hair was pulled up into a bun. She had a pretty yet hard look about her. We're closed, she said in a husky voice. Come back at 5 p.m. I'm not here for the service, ma'am, Zeke replied. I'm here for information. The woman folded her arms across her chest. What kind of information? I'm looking for a friend, he said. Last time I saw him was 2 days ago. He was with a couple of fancy folks before he disappeared. The woman laughed. You ain't gonna find anybody fancy up here. We're mining folks. What about the folks that own the mines? Zeke asked. A flash of anger appeared on the woman's face. She stomped down the stairs to the bar. Come on in, mister. Let's have a drink. Zeke met the woman at the bar. They shook hands. Her grip was strong, her hands calloused. Name's Diana, she said. Zeke. Good to meet you, Zeke. What's your poison? Whiskey, straight. Diana smirked. My kind of man. I like 'em brown and strong. Diana winked, then grabbed a whiskey bottle from the shelf with one hand and 2 shot glasses with the other. She filled the glasses and they both drank. Diana wiped her mouth with the back of her hand as she placed her glass on the bar. The Duvals own this mine and every inch of the land between here and those hills, she said. They're the closest thing to twin devils walking God's green earth. Duval doesn't sound Spanish, Zeke commented. It ain't, Diana replied. They're Americans, just like me, although I hate to claim them. I came during the first gold rush, made enough money to buy this saloon. They showed up just about when the gold began to peter out. Offered decent money for everybody's claim and good jobs for those willing to stay and work in the mines. They built that mine, but everything else was a goddamn lie. Zeke held his glass out for another shot of whiskey. Diana obliged. The bartender at El Mirage was afraid to talk about him, he said. You don't seem to have a problem. They can't do anything to me they ain't already done, Diana replied. Why don't you just leave? I wish it was that easy, Diana said. I owe them, and when you owe the Duvals, you just don't walk away. Just like your friend, I suspect. So where do I find them? Diana drank another shot. Follow the river south about 5 miles. You'll come to a ford on a road that heads due east. Stay on that road for another 5 miles until you see the mission. That's where they'll be. They live in a mission? That ain't no mission no more. It's a goddamn fortress. The graveyard is filled with folks that owed them money and didn't pay. There's a rumor that the Duvals ain't right, that they do things to people before they kill them. Things that make death a blessing. Thanks for the information, Zeke said. Looks like I need to pay the Duvals a visit. Diana's eyes bucked. You're going by yourself? Yes, I am, Zeke said. I thought you was going to back and bringing the Grand Army. That's the only reason I told you what I did. Nope, Zeke replied. I'm handling this alone. Shit, Diana said. We're as good as dead then. We'll see about that, Zeke replied. He finished his whiskey, then headed for his horses. Wait a minute. Diana climbed over the bar as Zeke turned around. She threw her arms around his shoulders and kissed him hard. He inhaled stale breath and whiskey before he finally pushed Diana away. She smiled as if she had found a gold nugget. Might as well get one now, she said, since you won't be coming back. Like I said, I like 'em brown and strong. And I never kissed a dead man before. Zeke scowled. Thank you for the vote of confidence. Zeke pushed through the door and went to his horses. Diana followed him outside. Hey, Zeke, she shouted. Just in case you do survive, you know where to find me. Zeke chuckled as he mounted his horse. I won't be looking, that's for damn sure. As Zeke rode for the outskirts of the town, a steam whistle blew, signaling the end of the shift. He looked toward the shaft openings and witnessed a grim sight. Armed guards were the first to emerge. Hulking men wearing khaki uniforms and wide-brimmed hats holding Winchesters. The workers trudged out moments later. They were dirty and frail, their eyes emitting the hopelessness conveyed by their appearance. Most of them didn't look strong enough to make it to the hills, let alone climb them. Anger stirred in his gut as he watched the sad procession, making him wish that he had come with the Grand Army, if only to free these desperate folks from what was slavery disguised as work. But the Army's campaign was done in Espana Nueva. A treaty had been signed between the rival nations, bringing hostilities to an end for the moment. Zeke noticed the guards looking in his direction, so he kicked his horse and hurried from the town. He wasn't running from a fight. He just didn't have time for one. He had to find Joshua. At sundown, he set up camp 3 miles away from the town near a clump of trees on the banks of the Pecos. Zeke sat before his fire, chewing on salt pork and sipping on coffee. He figured he'd get as close to the Duval's mission as he dared to study the building. It was most likely heavily guarded, but on the other hand, the Duvals might be so confident in their control that they didn't pay attention to such details. Still, it would do him good to be cautious. He felt guilty at taking a risk. Every moment not looking for Joshua increased the chances that he would never find his friend, dead or alive. But he wouldn't be any good to anyone if he was tired, so he had to rest. He finished his meal, put out the fire, then set up a place to sleep within the trees. First thing in the morning, he would set out on foot to the mission. It was the mule that woke him. The agitated beast braying alarmed Zeke. At first, he thought it might be under attack by a puma or coyotes. but the voices he heard soon afterwards revealed the source of its annoyance. Zeke rolled onto his stomach, grabbing his Henry. Looking toward the sound, he spotted the light of 3 torches near the river. He placed the Henry down and picked up the machete. If shots were fired, he had no doubt the sound would carry to the mission, and he would have a lot more trouble to handle. This would have to be wet work. 3 men would be tough, but he could handle them. Zeke rustled about loud enough for the men to hear him, then scampered away from his position. He watched the men creep toward the woods, then heard the click of revolver hammers being locked into place. "We don't know who the hell you are," a gruff voice called out, "but you're on private property. Best you come out now before things get ugly." Zeke responded by tossing a stick to where he slept. As soon as the stick hit the tree, the men rushed into the woods. Zeke scurried as well, his footfalls masked by the interlopers' movement. "He's not." Zeke slammed his machete hilt into the man's head before he finished his words. The man crumpled to the ground as Zeke leapt over him, slamming into the other 2 with his shoulder. One man fell, and Zeke kicked him across the jaw, knocking him unconscious. The 3rd man was raising his gun when Zeke chopped down on his wrist. There was a clanging sound. The man's arm dropped, but his hand was still intact. The man grinned as he raised his gun to fire. Zeke sidestepped and grabbed the revolver with his free hand. He snatched the gun away, then struck the man hard across the jaw. To his dismay, the man swiveled in a circle at his waist, striking Zeke across the jaw with a backhand. Zeke fell against the nearby tree, then barely avoided a punch that split the tree in half. Zeke ducked and dodged the man-thing's onslaught, looking for the right moment to strike. He stopped before a thick tree, feigning exhaustion. The man grinned as he swung at Zeke with a knife hand. Zeke ducked and watched the hand lodge into the thick tree trunk. The man grimaced as he tried to jerk his hand free. Zeke swung his machete and cut off the man's head. The sound of hissing filled the trees. The man's body collapsed into the ground as steam whooshed from his neck. "I'll be damned," Zeke whispered. He'd seen advanced escorts before, but nothing like this. Whoever created it managed to merge man and machine. Everything below the man's neck was mechanized metal. A sick realization came to him as he tied up the unconscious men, then broke camp. He had to reach the mission as soon as possible. Zeke tied up the unconscious men, then gathered his horse, mule, and provisions. Despite his better judgment, he worked his way up the road in darkness, urgency overruling common sense. Providence was on his side as he reached the steep rise in the trail. Zeke left the mule at the base of the hill, then led the horse to the crescent. He hunkered down when he saw a torchlight below. He assumed it came from the mission, but he wouldn't be sure until daybreak. With nothing left to do, he secured his horse, then attempted to rest until sunlight. Zeke was wide awake as the sun eased over the horizon, painting the sky with reddish hues. The light revealed the land below him, and a grim smile creased his face. Zeke stared down from the hilltop at the Duval mission. He took out his spyglass for a closer look. The building sat out in the open, surrounded by scrub grass and cactus, its stucco walls matching the surrounding sand. A cemetery occupied the ground before the entrance. Most of the tombstones were withered from age, but a good number were recent. There was no way he could approach the old building without being seen. One guard patrolled the grounds, occasionally stopping to take a pull from his cigar. The other leaned against the adobe wall on the second floor. Neither seemed diligent. They worked for the Duvals, and according to the bartender, no one in their right mind would dare attack their stronghold. But Zeke wasn't in his right mind. He folded his spyglass, then tucked it in his pocket before crawling behind the summit. His horse munched on a clump of grass, oblivious to the role it was about to play. Zeke did a self-inspection one last time. He wore a coat on each hip, his waist belt rimmed with bullets. 2 ammo belts of shotgun shells crisscrossed his chest. His shotgun rested in his leather holster and his machete in its sheath across his back. Strapped to his right calf was a dagger. On his left calf was his derringer. He sauntered to his horse, then took out his Henry from the saddle holster. He had the least number of rounds for it, but he didn't plan on using it once he got inside the mission. If he reached the mission. "God damn it, Joshua," he said. "Damn you to hell." Zeke took the whiskey flask from his saddle, twisted off the cap, then drank it dry. He wiped his mouth as the liquor burned its way into his stomach. He considered walking away, but he'd come too far. He couldn't leave a friend behind, especially if he knew what would happen if he did. Zeke grabbed the horse's rein, then led it to the hill crest. He slapped the horse's flank as hard as he could. The horse whinnied, then bolted over the hill toward the mission. Zeke darted to his right, keeping as low as he could and praying that the horse would keep the guard's attention until he was close enough. If he could reach the cemetery before he was spotted, he'd have some kind of cover once the shooting started. But that wasn't to be. A shot rang out. Zeke heard the bullet buzz past his head. Thank God for bad shots, he thought. He lifted his Henry, working the lever furiously as he gunned the man down. The extra shots just in case the man was an automaton. He wasn't. Bullets streaked by him and peppered the dirt around his feet as he dodged through the tombstones. Another bullet grazed his shoulder as he reached the wall, spinning him around. Zeke would have fell if he was not so close to the wall. He grimaced as he slammed against it, his hand going to the wound. He bled, but the wound was superficial. He gathered himself, then edged toward the gate. As he expected, the wooden barrier swung wide, unleashing half a dozen guards. Zeke ambushed them, killing all 6 in a matter of seconds. He ran through the door, entering the mission sanctuary. He ducked behind the closest pews as more guards released a storm of gunfire. Zeke dropped the Henry and snatched the revolvers from his holsters. He preferred the lever-action rifle, but it was too bulky for close-quarter fighting. He'd be stupid to try to work his way through such a barrage, so he would wait for them to come to him. And come they did. The first guard leaped over the pew, guns blazing. Zeke rolled away and fired back, striking the man in the torso. Zeke burst from cover, sprinting up the left side of the pews, shooting every step of the way. His goal was the door behind the altar. Luck and speed got him to the door on the right. To his chagrin, it was locked. He kicked near the lock, but the door refused to give. Zeke holstered his revolver and snatched out his shotgun and blasted the lock away. He kicked the door again and it flew open, revealing a long corridor with rooms on either side. Zeke ducked into the first room. A stench assailed his nose. He looked about and nearly vomited. The room was filled with rotting body parts, legs and limbs strewn over tables and benches. He fled the room, barreling into the guards that pursued him. A close-quarter melee ensued, guns firing and fist and knife blades flying. It was over in moments, with Zeke staggering wounded down the hallway, leaving a pile of dead and wounded men behind him. "Joshua!" he shouted. "Where the hell are you?" "Zeke!" Joshua shouted back. Zeke sprinted into the room from which Joshua's voice emanated. As he charged through the doors, he stumbled to a stop. Joshua, or what was left of him, sat on a bare table. His body was gone, replaced by a metal assembly like the guard he'd killed the night before. He heard a sound behind him and spun, his shotgun raised. 2 figures stood in the doorway draped in white coats, their faces covered with surgical masks. Both pointed revolvers at Zeke. They removed their masks, revealing the man and the woman Zeke assumed were the Duvals. The man snarled as he spoke. "You're a dead man," he said. "You'll never leave this building alive." "Never," the woman repeated. "You two first," Zeke answered. He blasted the man and the woman into the hallway before they could fire. He lowered the shotgun, then turned to Joshua. "Zeke," Joshua said, tears streaming from his eyes. "Do it." "Do what?" Zeke replied. "Kill me, Zeke. I can't live like this. I can't." Zeke's hands trembled. "No," he replied. "Do it!" Joshua shouted. Zeke aimed the shotgun at Joshua's head. Joshua smiled. "Thank you, friend," he said. "Merci, mon ami," Zeke replied. "Merci." Zeke closed his eyes as he pulled the trigger. The blast jolted his body inside and out. When he opened his eyes, what was left of his friend was sprawled on the table. Darkness settled into Zeke, a blackness that covered his heart and infected his thoughts. He reloaded his guns, then emerged from the room with morbid intentions. Zeke walked from room to room, hunting for any person in the mission. Those he found alive he killed, Those that were dead, he put another bullet in them for good measure. When he was done, he sought and found the storage room. There were 2 canisters of kerosene. He emptied the contents throughout the building. He exited the structure, lit a match, then tossed it inside. He waited for the fire to catch before closing the door, then trudging away. By the time he reached the hilltop, the mission was fully ablaze. "Goodbye, Joshua," he whispered. He gathered his horse and mule, then rode away. Zeke came into the base mid-afternoon, 2 days after his encounter at the mission. His comrades looked at him warily as he trudged by. Hitching his horses, he made his way to the commander's office. St. Fleur looked up at Zeke's grim face and frowned. "I'm sorry," he said. Zeke plopped into the chair before the commander's desk and took off his hat. "Did you bring back his body?" St. Fleur asked. "Wasn't much to bring back," Zeke answered. Zeke told St. Fleur everything. The commander's face reflected his horror and revulsion. "You did the right thing," he said to Zeke. "I'll write a letter to his family. We'll say he died in combat. Best to spare them the details." "That's kind of you, sir," Zeke replied. "If you don't mind, I like to deliver that letter. It's the best I can do." "Of course," the commander replied. "Like I said, you're a good friend, Zeke Culpepper. If you ever decide to come back to your senses and rejoin the Grand Army, I'd be happy to serve as your commander." "Thank you, sir, but that won't happen," Zeke replied. "I'm done with killing. I think I'll go back home and try my luck at farming." "I don't see you as a farmer," St. Fleur said. "I don't either," Zeke replied. "But there's a farm in Georgia waiting for me, so I might as well give it a try." The commander nodded. "Gather your gear. We leave within the hour." Zeke returned to his bunk. He stripped out of his civvies and took a long shower, all the while trying to shake the image of Joshua lying on the table, his blood dripping over the edge. He returned to his bunk, then donned his uniform as the other soldiers left the room for the airship field. Zeke glanced at Joshua's empty bunk, and the grief hit him all at once. He sat hard on his bed, then covered his face with his hands, hiding the tears escaping from his eyes despite his best effort. "God damn it, Joshua," he shouted. "God damn it." He let the tears flow for a few minutes more before wiping his face and straightening his uniform. Zeke threw his duffel bag over his left shoulder, his weapon case across his back, then strode to the field. The airships had arrived, the armored dirigibles completing their final approach. As the craft eased down to the field, Zeke managed to smile as he remembered his friend. Joshua was the last person that would want him to brood over his death. He'd done what his friend asked him to do. Joshua was at peace. In the end, that's all that mattered. The end. So, I hope you enjoyed Slipping in the Darkness. I'll give you guys a few minutes to catch up, see if anybody has any questions. Alrighty, if all is said and done. I see Barry said it was like watching a movie. That's a very good compliment for me to receive, because when I write these stories, they are like a movie to me. Hey Ronald, I'm glad you like the action. Hey, it's from here to Timbuktu, man. That's what that's all about. It's about action. So that was, again, Slipping in the Darkness, a Timbuktu prequel story. Next week is the last week for Steampunk Month. I hope you guys have been enjoying it. Once again, all of my steampunk titles are on sale. From here to Timbuktu, La Rosa de Matanzas, and the Steampunk Anthology. Ronald just mentioned that he's looking forward to the next book in the series, and I am looking forward to writing it, Ronald. The Golden Jaguar is the next book in the series. I've actually started on it, gotten pretty deep into it, actually. I don't think it's going to be done by the end of this year, but it will definitely be done next year, which will draw a conclusion to the Timbuktu trilogy. Next week, I actually will be reading an excerpt from a new Fredonia novel, the Curious Cases of Mary Periwinkle. I know a lot of you guys have seen the image that Sean Hill did that was colored by Jesse Hagee, and have been intrigued by it. So tomorrow, I mean not tomorrow, but next week, next Wednesday, at the same time, I will be reading excerpts from that novel. Barry says, "Now I have to get this book." You do, Barry, you do. But again, thank you guys for coming. I hope you enjoyed the read, and I will see you guys next week, same time, for excerpts from The Curious Cases of Mary Periwinkle. Y'all have a good evening. Peace.